Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe to my channel. Today we are going to see the part 1 of SAS macro series, and this is introduction. And here I would like to tell a couple of things before going into the topic itself. Here I will be presenting a lot of information. Most of the information which I am trying to present here is what I will be covering in the future classes. So this will be a very high level class wherein I will be introducing a lot of concepts, and I want to show you here what macro can do and what is all about macro. But the details of all these things we are going to understand in the future classes only. So to sum it up, this class is all about giving a high level information about SAS macros. Now let us try to understand what is the main goal of macro. The main goal of SAS macro is to generate text. It works more as a text generator or a source code generator. Now we will try to understand this with examples. So in the text generation, we are going to discuss two kinds. Initially, I will discuss simple text generation like text generation for dataset names or variables, or how to generate lots and lots of code using SAS macro. Now, as I said to you, this is a very high level class, and in the future I will be going into details of all of this. Now let's try to understand the simple text generator. And here I'm using this with the help of %let statement, wherein I will be showing how to generate text, especially in the case of simple scenario. Now here I have a %let statement, and here I am saying %let dsn equal to SAS help.class. Here we are creating a macro variable, and a macro variable has the value of SAS help.class. So what do you need to understand here is whatever we are storing in the macro variable itself is simple and plain text. And here once we have defined our macro variable, I can access this macro variable in the below proc. So what is happening in here is I'm referencing this macro variable by using %dsn. So when %dsn is used, what is happening is it is going to generate this SAS help.class here and here. So if you can see in this example, what we are doing here is generating simple text for our procs. Now more on %let statements and others in separate classes. I will be having individual class for %let statement. Now let us quickly run this code. Here I have added one more thing in here, that is option symbol gen. Symbol gen is one of SAS macro debugging option wherein it gives the value of macro variable itself, or it gives how this value is resolved or what is the value it is resolved into. Now let us quickly run this piece of code and see what is happening in the log and also what is happening in the result. In the result we can see that it has done proc print, proc mean and proc freak. And let's also look into the log. In the log it says that our macro variable %dsn is resolved to SAS help.class. This is what I was talking about. That is, this dsn is resolved into a text, and this text is used here for our proc print. Now this proc print becomes proc print data equal to SAS help.class run. In the same fashion, for other two procs also, this dsn or rather %dsn is resolved into SAS help.class. This is in a way we are providing text to this procs with the help of our macro variable which we have created in here. Now let us look into our next example. Here we are going to generate code, not simple text like what I have shown you earlier. To understand this, let us look into an example here. Here I have a dataset have and I want to append have to dataset want. I can simply use proc append, but I want to do it 100 times, which means I want to do proc append base equal to want, data equal to have run. I want to write 100 times so that the data in the have appends in want for 100 times. So if I have to do this without the help of macro programming language, what I need to really do is I need to write this step 100 times. Instead of that, what I can do is I can create a simple macro and then execute that macro, which will create all of these statements 100 times. So in a way, we are generating code 100 times. I again know that I have not taught you anything about creating and executing macro, but we will be seeing that in our future classes. Now let us see this in real time, how we are going to do it. Now here I have the same data set have, and I am using here a macro which I am calling it as ABC, and then I am also executing this macro by using %abc. You need not know everything or you need not understand everything in here, but what I want you to understand here is how macro programming language is helping us to generate the text without we typing it. Now I also have options mprint in here. What mprint does is it gives the SAS statements which are created in SAS macro. SAS macro is nothing but whatever we are creating in between this macro and ment. Now let us quickly run this whole of this code and then look into our log, and then we will understand it much better. Now once I have run this code, and let's look into our log. If you look into our log and let's go very up, we can see that there is a lot of proc append statements here. See here, there is one proc append statement, there is two, there are close to 100 proc append statements. So if you think closely, without typing this proc append base equal to want, data equal to have run, the macro itself is creating these statements for us. One time, two time, and 100 times. And if you look into the data of the want will have close to 400 records because it has appended so many times. 4 records, each one of them have, and then I have appended it 100 times. Here another important thing I want you to remember is I have made a video on this, and link for the same I will give in the description below. It goes in little bit more detail about this. But with these two examples, what I want you to understand here is macro programming language is more of a text generator, and I want you to think in the terms that whenever you want to provide some text or whenever you want to generate some code, you always think about macro programming language. Now that we have looked into how macro programming language works as a text generator, now let us quickly look into how the macro program is used in the real time. These are some examples. I'm not going to go in detail into any of this. I will touch base it at a very high level. Again, we are going to come back to all of this in the future sessions or classes. Now, the macro programming language is helpful in 4 points here. I don't want to read out, but let's see it in here. So macro programming language, we can create a macro variable in some step. That is, here I have a proc equal step, and these macro variables which I am creating in here, I can use in some other step. So macro programming language is very helpful if you want to create macro variables in some step or somewhere and use it somewhere else. And then next one is, as I've already shown you, you can repeatedly execute any procedure or anything. Here we have repeatedly executed this code 100 times. And the next example, let's look into, again, I'm not going to go in the details of this one. Here again we have a macro. And here what we are doing is, depending upon the parameter we pass here, we will either proc print or we will either do this data step. Whatever the value we pass here, if we are going to pass happy here, if happy equal to happy, then this is going to execute. So again, we are creating a macro and we are executing a macro, but the control we have is, if we want to do this step or we want to do this step, we can conditionally execute it. This percent if, percent then, percent do look little bit complex. So I don't want to go in detail in here, but we will be touch basing that in the future classes. But what I want you to know is, a macro programming language gives you a control to conditionally execute a data step or a proc step depending upon the value we pass in here. Now let us quickly run the code what I have shown you earlier. But here also I have options mprint and mlogic. I have spoken about mprint earlier. Mprint, mlogic are SAS macro options which we generally use to debug the code. Mlogic tells about how a macro is executed. Now let us quickly compile our macro and also let's run the options too. The compiling of macro means we are running the code from %macro to %ment, which is our macro. And once we have compiled, I can pass the parameter I want to pass. That is, here I am passing val equal to happy. That means I am giving this macro variable value val as happy. And then let's quickly run that. Once we run this code, you can see that SAS help.class has been printed. And let's quickly look into the log also. Here the log, you can see that proc print data equal to SAS help.class run has been printed, and you can see that the condition happy equal to ampersand val is true because we have passed happy as the value. Now if I run val equal to sad, that is my macro variable or my macro parameter value as sad, then you are going to see that we are creating a data set. And let's quickly look into the log. So in the log you see that the happy equal to ampersand val condition is false. That is what our mlogic tells us. But the most importantly, you can see that this piece of code is executed. So what I want to tell from whole of this thing is, depending upon the value we pass, we can have control to do a proc print or to create a data set. This kind of thing is generally very difficult to handle without having any macro. Again, I want you to focus on one important thing. That is, whenever we are running this whole of this code, you need to remember that we are generating this text or this text. After the code is generated, it is executed with the SAS compiler. One of the most powerful aspects of SAS macro programming language is how flexible it makes the code and also how generalized it makes the code. Let me explain you through an example. For example, here I have three procedures which I want to execute, that is proc print, proc means and proc freq. and I want to do that on a same data set, that is SAS help.class. So what I could do simply is I can write %let dsn equal to SAS help.class and I can reference them at three places like this. What is the advantage of writing in this fashion? For example, tomorrow you are not interested in SAS help.class but you want to do SAS help.cars. So what you can simply do is you can simply write %let dsn equal to SAS help.cars. As the macro variable name dsn is same, it will pick up now SAS help.cars instead of SAS help.class. Now let us look into the code we have just now discussed. Here I have my %let statement here wherein I am saying %let dsn equal to SAS help.class, and then I have my proc print, proc means and proc freak. All of them have data is equal to ampersand dsn. Now let us quickly run this piece of code, and after running the code let's quickly look into the results also. In the results you can see that we have proc printed SAS help.class and we have means related to SAS help.class. And here now I want to change this class to cars. So simply what I can do is can change the SAS help.class to SAS help.cars. It is super simple. I did not have to change at three places, but I have to change in one place. And once I run this code, it will print and it will do everything related to SAS help.cars. Now, the data set of SAS help.cars is much bigger, so it took some time. Now you can see that we have different proc print and different proc means and others. So if you see, there is a lot of different information here. The main emphasis point I want to say in here is, for example, if I had some 20 or 30 statements, which are most often the cases in the real world, I have to change at one place and everything follows through. This gives a tremendous amount of flexibility. And whenever you have a scenario when you're using the same thing at multiple places, always use a macro variable so that if you want to make any changes in the future, it will be smooth and you don't have to repeatedly write the code. You just need to change at one place and everything flows through. I just came up with some applications. There could be many more applications. Now that we have looked into what is a SAS macro and what are some common applications, now let us look into how SAS macro works. So whenever we have SAS macro related code, that is whenever we have percent or ampersand symbol, which are known as macro triggers, they work first and then the remaining code, which is a data step code or maybe proc-SQL code, it runs later. So to understand this, let us try to understand it little bit slowly. Whenever we have macro references along with the code, we need to understand that macro references are resolved first. And this is because of design, because we want macro processor to generate code for our data steps or other procs. This is a very important thing to understand. And let's try to understand this by looking into next slide. Here again we have %let dsn equal to SAS help.class, proc print data equal to ampersand dsn run. When we run %let dsn equal to SAS help.class, we are going to create a macro variable. And we are going to reference in this proc print. Now we need to understand one thing in here. When we run this proc print, the proc print itself is not going to run immediately, but first this ampersand dsn resolves to SAS help.class. Something like this: proc print data equal to SAS help.class run. After this ampersand dsn is resolved into SAS help.class, then only proc print runs. And as I said to you earlier, anything with the symbol of % and ampersand followed by a non-blank is known as macro triggers. When SAS macro processor looks into this ampersand or percent symbol with a non-blank character, it will execute immediately. And this is very important to know. And now let us try to understand whole of this in more detail and in a form of a visual. Whenever we run our code, for example, in here we have our code like %let mac var equal to SAS help.class data class set ampersand mac var run. We need to understand that the code immediately goes into memory, and this is known as input stack. Once the code is in input stack, what happens is there is a word scanner which looks into each of these words and will try to understand what kind of words they are. Or rather, we could say it looks into them as tokens, whether this is a literal token or whether it is a number token or whether it is a name token and whether it is a special token. Percent symbol and ampersand symbol are special tokens. Whenever this percent symbol or ampersand symbol are seen by macro processor, it immediately executes them. In here what is happening is as soon as it sees the %let statement, what happens is this macro processor looks into them and then it creates this macro variable and keeps into a symbol table. More on the symbol table as we move to the future classes. And then this whole of this code goes into a compiler. And once this ampersand macvar is resolved into SAS help.class, which gets its value from the symbol table, then the compiler will compile this data step and the code execution happens. I have not really gone to the details of how tokenization happens. That is how each word is checked line by line, word by word, and then how they are analyzed and all those things. But the important point here, what I wanted to say was, there is a macro processor after this tokenization wherein it looks into macro triggers and will try to resolve or work on them immediately even before the code is compiled. Now I would like to focus or explain how I am going to teach SAS macro programming language. I will be discussing or I will be focusing on three main concepts, and these three concepts are very important to know to work in the real time. The first one is simple substitution. Second one is how to create simple macros. And the third one is dynamic programming, wherein you are not going to do any hard coding or you are not going to pass parameters, but you are going to write programs which are data driven. And here we will be using calls input or into clause followed by usage of control table and call execute. Even though I have mentioned here three concepts, we will be covering various topics like %if then statement, SAS macro symbol table, SAS macro function, SAS macro libraries and others. Now let's look into each one of them very briefly. Simple substitution looks something like this, wherein we will be creating macro variable and we will be referencing those macro variable in our programs. And also the macro program creation is also something like wherein we start with a macro and wherein we end with mend, and we have lot of program in between, and then we are going to execute this macro. And the third and the final one is dynamic programming. Here, to understand this, let me explain you with a simple example. Now I want to proc print all the datasets of SAS help wherein the dataset name starts with C. Instead of passing something like this wherein I can pass dsn equal to SAS help.class and something like that, I want to write a program wherein I really don't have to hard code anything, but I can create a macro variable somewhere in here, like as shown in here, and then I can do a proc print. This kind of program is not dependent on any human intervention or hard coding, but rather it depends upon the code the way you have written it, which means you are handling everything in a very dynamic way and very data driven way. Now it's time to conclude our introduction. In this introduction, I have covered quite a few topics. The first one is I try to explain what a macro facility does. And what a macro facility does is it generates text. It should be text generation, not text substitution. And it can generate simple text or lot of text. And macro programming language has lot of applications like passing values between one step to another, running multiple times same proc or data step, or conditionally executing proc or data step, and also it helps us to make a flexible code. And now let's try to look into another important point which we also discussed, how macro facility works. The most important here is macro triggers, which are percent and ampersand followed by a non-blank character, work earlier than our SAS programs, which could be data step or proc SQL or anything else, are compiled later. And our learning strategy will be simple. It will start with simple substitution followed by writing macro programs and finally dynamic programming. That's all for this topic. If you like this topic, please give it a thumbs up, share and subscribe. Thank you.